Hey guys, it's Samuel here from Authentication, and today I thought I'd show you a really cool, fun project about how to upload and download files and search for files on the Google Drive API. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is, just have a little look at Google Drive's API Quick Start Guide. And it goes through quite nicely about how you can get started. The first thing you want to do is go through with this wizard. This wizard will allow us to essentially enable an API, create an API project, and essentially get an OAuth key. So let's create the project first. And we will just click Create Project, Continue. So it'll create a project for us to be able to do this. And it'll take, 5-10 seconds, sometimes up to a minute. So if you have a long time, if you spend a long time waiting for this sort of thing, it's not unusual for it to take a fair amount of time. And you see it says enabling API in the left hand corner. So now we can go to credentials, and you can see Google Drive API, and we want to choose other UI because we're going to get the user to log in. And we click user data, and then we just click what credentials do I need, and we can just create an OAuth client. And I think we'll just call it client, and click create ID. Okay, product name to show to users, we're just going to call this Google Drive API tutorial, and we're going to click continue, and it will load and it will allow us to download our client ID. So click download. It says client_ID. Now what we need to do is we need to just get this, we'll get this into our project once we've started. So if you scroll down a bit more, it says that once we've done this, we can copy this setup sample. So let's just copy this setup sample. I'll leave the link to this so you can access it and have a go yourself. And let me just open up Visual Studio. The reason I'm using Visual Studio as opposed to the Python IDE is I find that Visual Studio is much easier to install packages. It's generally much easier just to code in general, autocomplete, all that stuff makes it very simple. So if you want a video about how to get set up with this, be sure to post it down below. Okay, so we're just going to call this Google Drive API tutorial project. I mean, it doesn't need to be that long, but might as well be descriptive. And it's just gonna quickly create a project. While we're waiting, oh, it's actually done now. So we can just paste in the stuff. And the nice thing about Visual Studio is you can change Python environments very quickly to what you want to be running for, what you want the IDE to actually check for. So if we go to packages, we need to make sure that all of these packages we're importing actually exist, including the Google API-Python -client that has to exist. So if it doesn't, type it in and you can install it. And the original Python IDE, I think you can use pip, similar idea. You can just install using the command line. If you want a video on that, please put it down in the comments as well. Okay, so we just need to copy our client secret, and at the moment I believe it's called client_ID. So let's just quickly copy this in. Just quickly copy that in. I think we need it in the central project. So let's get that in the central project right now. Okay, so let's rename this client secret, and now it will be appropriate. Client secret, there we go. Now it should work for our project. Okay, so now we can just do run, and let's see if it works. Now what should happen, oh, you can see there's an error here. Let's just check. OAuth client was deleted. Oh. Oh, and we need to click done, otherwise it won't set up the credentials for us. So if we just set that up, otherwise you might run into errors if you don't click done, it appears. Anyway, let's just run that now. And you can see because we didn't click done, it wasn't able to launch this. We can click this, we can allow the credentials, and now you can see it says authentication flow has completed. So let's just go back quickly, and you can see what it's actually run. So it's printed a list of all the files in my Google Drive, and it's got, you know, a list including the ones in the trash. So I put a few in the trash just as examples, deleted files, and you can see it gives you all of them. So you can say, I believe there's a field you can search for that as well. Anyway, let's get back to the main project that we're trying to achieve today. So we've just done a basic, simple run of the quick start guide, which prints out 10 of the first 10 files in your Google Drive. So let's just close the program from running and go to the Solution Explorer and add another file. Or if you're in Python, you can create another file. Similar idea. And we're just going to call this one auth, because I feel like we should make a separate class just for authentication and dealing with that side of things. So you can see the authentication section is dealt here. So we just copy this over and we'll create a class called auth, and we're gonna need all the stuff we imported at the top to make sure that we have everything. Do that. And now let's just set up an init method. You should always set up an init method for any class. So we do def underscore init underscore open bracket self, and we're going to have to enter in all the stuff we want to keep. So scopes is going to be one of them, which is the permissions I'll explain that in a bit, but it's basically the permissions that your client has. So that your access to the API, what sort of things you can do, whether you can delete files, create files, or whether you can only just read files. That's the sort of thing we're talking about here. Okay, so let's just make sure we have everything. Application name is another one we're going to need. Okay, so let us just tabulate this out so it's got a higher level of indentation, so it lines up with our method. And just going to hit pass there and make another method called get credentials, and it will return credentials. While this is just gonna, we're just going to do self dot, and we're going to set all the variables that we've already called. So self dot scopes, self dot scopes, which is basically the permissions, is equal to the scopes that we imported, and self dot client underscore secret equals client secret file. Let's make sure we add the underscore file here. And last one for application name, client application equals application name. Okay, so we have those set up. Now we need to make sure we add self in here in this get credentials method. And I'm going to change a few things in here. So let's make sure this is self dot, because we're calling from this kind of global variable self. And we need to make sure that all these can be accessed. Okay, so self application, application name needs to have self, doesn't it? And that needs to have self, and then obviously the scopes, they need to have self as well. Self.scopes, so it can access this original section. And I'm going to make a few changes. So here it's getting the home directory, but I want it to write to our I want it to write the credentials to our project directory, so I can see the credentials and easily delete them. So what we're going to do to change this is I'm just going to get rid of this, and I'm going to replace it with CWD, which stands for current working directory. CWD directory equals os.get CWD. Now this will get our current project directory, and I can just change that to CWD, and then we can just more easily control our credentials. I'm going to change this from the quick start credentials just to be Google Drive credentials, just something like that, just so it's not quick start anymore. So we've set up the auth quite nicely. Let's set up a main file so we can actually test this. So if we just type a new module called main.py, and we're just going to take the top half of this. We need to keep that, and we're going to import auth and credentials equals auth. Actually, we'll do an instance. So okay, so now we can set up the auth. So we can just do auth, create an auth instance from the auth file from the auth module we just made. Okay, so here we're going to insert scopes, the client secret file, application name, and we're just going to set up that instance there. And the credentials will obviously equal the auth instance and get the credentials. So that will return this here, returns the credentials, and sets it to the credentials file. Okay, so let's just start by making a very simple function that will allow us to list the files. So we've already done this already in the test file, haven't we? So if we just grab that from the test file here, we can see this allows us to list all the files that are currently there. So if we just make a function called list files and just paste this in, and we need to make sure that's there, and let's just see what we need to add and take away. So this here is common for every method. We can see that because it's to do with credentials. And also, if you look at other source code, you'll see that this service thing is often called drive service. So we're just going to call it drive service, just so it's common with other, Google's notations, and obviously it's more helpful for you guys as well. So let's just change service to drive_service, and let's test this out. Okay, list files, and I'm going to actually add a size here, where it allows us to change the page size directly from outside the function. Now let's run this and see what happens. Okay, so we have to log in again. Log into our test account, allow, authentication flow is completed. It should have now listed all our files. So it's listed all our files, including ones which have been trashed, and that's pretty cool. But what if we want to upload a file? Let's say we want to upload a file to Google Drive. How do we do that? Well, let's make another function called upload file, and we're going to need to know the file. We're going to need to know the file name first of all, and then we're going to want to know what the file path is. So let's do that. Let's get some code that can do that. Now, a little shortcut to doing this is actually to use Google's projects. If you type in Google Drive API file upload file, it's the top link. I'll put this in the description, link in the description, and you can just take this code here, basic uploads, and it shows how to import Google Docs files and stuff. Pretty straightforward. You can just copy this code, and we can actually just paste it straight in here. And let's tabulate it so it will go out. Okay, so we need to get a file to test and upload, and you can see they seem to have like a concurrent theme that, so all the print functions are Python 2 print functions. They don't have the parentheses on the outside, the brackets. So let's just set this up. So here is the file name, and let's remove those quotation marks. And here is the file path. So let's say file path, save that. And this is the MIME type. So this is the type of file you're uploading, and it's quite specific. It allows Google to do processing on that file. So let's say if it was a, I don't know, say you entered a MIME type that it was a Google Docs document, then it could make sure that it was showing in your Google Docs section, that sort of thing, you know. Anyway, so you can save it like that, and now we can call this function. But first, we need a file to upload. So let us get a file to upload. And the easiest thing to do is just go Google Images and find an image. Any image. Let's just take this cool picture of Google's 16th birthday, save as, and quickly save it. It's called unnamed PNG, I think, JPEG. Okay, and we can just drag this into our files. And now what we can do is we can test out whether we can upload this to our Drive folder. So let's do that right now. So upload, and the file name we want to upload it with is unnamed.jpg, I think is the name we're going for. Unnamed, oops, missed a quotation mark there. Unnamed.jpg, and now when we run it, should work. Let's just test to make sure that we have got the file name correctly, and we have unnamed.jpg. We now run that. Let's see whether it pops up or not. And it appears we may have run into an error. Let's just check what the error is. Oh, silly mistake, we forgot to add the MIME type. The MIME type is just image/JPEG. Easy mistake to make. So now when we run it, file upload MIME type. Did we enter the correct MIME type this time? Let's see. Now, the reason why we got this error and the reason why I left this part of the video in is because you have to make sure you have this part imported from their client section. So you have to do from API client.http import media file upload. So you can see that's something we need to have in. And if we just now run it, you can see we have insufficient permissions. Now, why do we have insufficient permissions? It's because this says drive.meta.read-only. Now, this is meaning that let's just describe what this means. Metadata is like the file name, when the file was created. Read-only means you can only read files, you can't add files, you can't write stuff. So actually, we want to be in the top level here. We want to be in the top level. And what that means is we have full access to the account. So if we just go back to here and delete the credentials folder, and now we rerun the program, you'll see that it will open up a new window. And again, we have to authorize it because we want to have the full authentication enabled. And if we go here, you can see that it has successfully uploaded the file, and it's given us the file ID right there. Okay, so what we can do is we can actually check to see if this file is there, and you can see it right there, unnamed.jpg. It has been uploaded, which is great. So let's do the next section, and the next section is obviously going to be to download a file from Google Drive. So let's rename this. I was thinking of renaming this google.jpg because that's its real name, and we'll just download it again just as an example. Okay, so we finished that section there. We might want to leave that in as a comment just so we remember next time. And we can do, let's just move that down. Okay, def download file. And yes, we are going to have to add in something again here, media IO base download. That's a required module. Okay, and in order to download a file, what we actually need is the file ID. So that is the file, each file has a file ID. If I just go to the last one here, you see how it says file ID while we print it out. That is unique to every file, and we need it when we download a file. We need to know what it is. So when testing, we can set up our own file ID as the one that we uploaded, just to make things easier. Okay, so that's the file ID, and then you want the file path for where it to write. So the file path of where we want to write the file. I'm just going to call it google.jpg, so it'll write it to our local directory in the same directory as our Python file. And you may have guessed that Google also has some stuff about downloading files. If you go here, download files, yeah, this will be in the description as well. You can easily download the file. It's actually not too difficult. You have the file ID, this is the Python code. You have the file ID, which is unique to the file. You use the drive service, and you get the file ID. And then you use the byte IO, and then it'll basically go through chunk by chunk. And then what we can actually do is we can do like a seek method and write this. I'll show you what I mean if you don't understand what I'm talking about. So copy this in, and we have to indent it out. We don't actually need this because we've already made a method for this, and obviously they always seem to fail to add the parentheses. Okay, so this will download a file, but it won't save the file. So in order to save the file, we need to add a function with IO, with IO. And obviously we haven't imported IO yet because we need IO to use the receiving the bytes from our download location. Open, so IO.open, and this is when we insert our file path, and then next we insert WB to write bytes. Okay, and we're just going to do as f, like as file, and we do fh seek 0, so it seeks the file in memory, and we do f.write fh read, and it should read it. So it seeks it, and then we can read it, and now that means we can run the file. So let's see if it will download the file. So we've got nothing in here called google.jpg. Just refresh that, but google.jpg is here. So let's see if we can run it, see what happens. And it's running, and it says download is 100%. Let's go to our file, and here we go, google.jpg is there, and you can see there it is. So that's just a really simple way of downloading and uploading files. But what happens if we want to search for files? And what happens if we want to create folders? So I'll again comment this out, and I'm going to show you quickly how to create a folder in Google Drive. Create folder, and obviously you want the folder name. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. And again, you know, they have lots of sample code. So if you want to create folders, you can work with folders, and you can just create a folder using this code. They give the syntax, which is obviously useful. So we just paste that in. So we just paste that in and tabulate it, and we need to add the parentheses in again for the upload and creation of file, etc. here. So invoices is the file name, so we'll just replace that with name. Other than that, that's the only thing we need to add. So this is a very simple method for creating folders. So create folder, and we're going to create a folder. Let's just, for the sake of it, create a folder called Google. Okay. If we run this, what it should do is it should take our metadata, which is the name, and the MIME type, which specifies that we want it to be a folder. It will then create a file, and a folder is classed as a file. They're all files, although technically it's not, but it's kind of the file type is a folder. It will execute that, and then it will print the ID of the folder at the end. Okay, so let's run that, and let's see how it does. So it's connected to the server, and you can see a folder ID right there. So that means it successfully made the folder. So let's go and check that. See, Google is a valid file. Okay, so now we've done that, we've created a file. Let's do the last part of our project, and that is going to be to search for files, because we're always going to need to be searching for files. So let's just quickly do that right now. Search for files. So we're going to define the size, and we're basically going to copy this method here, the list file method up here. Oops, we're just going to copy that, and we're going to add some extra little sections to it. Essentially what we need to add is we need to add some queries to this. So at the moment it just searches, it will just list files. So if we were to run this at the moment, let's just close that or comment that out. Search file, oops. If we were to just run it, it will at the moment just print out all the files. What we want to do is we want to query. So the way we query is we actually add another parameter called q. And the q parameter allows you to add a string with some parameters. And I'll just go to the website, the section on Google where they talk about this. So if you just type in search files Google Drive API, and it should come up with some stuff about operators, and here it is. So it gives you the different operators for the different field names. Very useful, so you can work out what you want to search for in the file list. Okay, so now I've shown you that. Let me just go back to here. So a query might look like this. We know that every folder or file has a name, so name. And we know that one of the operators that it supports is contains, and we know that one of them is called Google. So let's put contains Google. It should now return the folder Google, or any files called Google, and I think it should return two files. Let's just see how it goes. And you can see we have an error, and why we have an error is because this has no quotation marks. We actually have to use single quotes here to highlight that this is the value, this is the field, has no quotation marks. This is the value, which has to have quotation marks. It's important that we remember that. And now we run it, and you should see that it works. So it produces the two folders. There was originally another folder in the trash called Google before I deleted all the spam and stuff that was already there. So you can see we have the two different folders and this folder here, which shows that the search method works. So let's try and generalize it. So the best way we're going to generalize this is by just creating an operator string. And that's all we'll do. Just create an operator string, and actually we'll call it, I think for the sake of this, I think it might be nice to call it Q as query, or we could call it query. Operator is probably not the best name, so let's just call it query. Okay, so now we can do 10, and we can enter in any query we want here. So an example of a query might be name contains getting, because you know the getting started guide. If we run that, see what comes back. You can see the getting started guide comes back. And this is a way you could potentially just download things you want, etc. At the moment, it just prints out where is it? It's here. It just prints out the name and the ID. But you could even make it so it returned the items if you wanted. So it could just return the items. So look, I could make it return the items, but that's for you to decide. Let me just make it so it prints each item as it goes through them. Run this again. And you can see it has ID and name. And the fields, for which fields you want to obtain, are all here. So we can go back to that list that we had here. These are all the possible attributes. So it's worth, using some of these. Okay, so let's add in a few like kind, mime, type, and these should allow you to differentiate whether they are folders, files, etc. Run this, and now it tells you all the information about them, and it's enough information. Gives you the ID, the name, and it's enough to download the file. Anyway, as always, I'll leave all the code and all the links I used in the description below. If you have any questions whatsoever about the stuff I've done in this video, anything about APIs in general, any APIs you want me to cover in videos like this, be sure to put them down below. And be sure to get subscribed as well. I'm going to be doing more API videos in the future as well. And it's worth to note that APIs like this, there are many, 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 many more Google APIs. This is just a list of all the products, and you can see there's a lot of APIs there that Google serves. So just put any down below in the description that you want me to go through. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, guys. Be sure to give this video a like if you found it helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.